This week on To the Contrary.
First, women, the Pope, and politics, and the Supreme Court. Then, football, binge drinking, and rape. Behind the headlines, a Cambridge anatomist's controversial explanation for women's distinct body shapes.
I'm Bonnie Urbay. Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, this week's news affecting women, the Supreme Court, and the presidential race.
Who will replace the late Justice Antonin Scalia on the Supreme Court, and who will make the appointment? How will the court decide pivotal cases this term affecting abortion rights and diverse communities? U.S. Court of Appeals Judge Sri Srinivasan is seen as a likely candidate, as is U.S. Attorney General Loretta Lynch, among others. In other news, Republican presidential frontrunner Donald Trump and Pope Francis got into it this week, with the Pope saying Trump isn't Christian because he wants to build a wall at the U.S.'s southern border to keep out illegal immigrants. Trump shot back the Pope was, quote, disgraceful, end quote, to question his faith.
So, Dr. Avis Jones-DeWeever, when you stop laughing, can you please tell me, are women more likely to side with the Pope or Trump?
I definitely have to think Mr. 2 Corinthians is hard to think is authentic, so I think we're more likely to side with the Pope.
Sad as it is, you have to see what part of the country these women we're asking are in, because in certain parts of this country, it's going to be Trump.
I agree. I think it really depends on what their prior perspective was. I don't think this is going to change too much.
As we've seen with Trump time and time again, anytime we think something is going to damage him, it ends up helping him. So I have to agree with everyone else. It depends on what woman we're asking.
Well, yeah, I mean, if it's the evangelicals whose vote he's going after, who don't see the Pope as anything other than, you know, a religious leader in a different religion and not their religious leader, they're going to say Trump was right to call him out, right?
Look, I think we should pull back for a second and talk about how bizarre this is. This is literally, I mean, the epitome of how bizarre this entire primary race has been in the road to the general. Where are we going? I'm like most strategists who got the email saying, is this a byline from Dr. Seuss? Trump against the pontiff? So it's just really, really crazy it's gotten to this point. The truth of the matter is...
But he's going to win the nomination.
Maybe he will. Maybe he won't.
I cannot see the way that Frank Luntz said when this first started breaking out in the fall with, you know, respected Republican pollster, he's got the nomination. And I have been watching and saying no, 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 and finally... Yes,
and I tend to be with Frank. I do. I think Frank is really right in that. We all know the inevitable is near. What is the RNC going to do? And I've been a surrogate for them for the past 5 years. I really think we have a problem on our hands. And we have a problem because this guy, you know, if you say something good about him, he's your friend. You say something slightly negative, he's going to come at you even harder. So the fact that we have this really cartoon character who is about to win the nomination for our party, we're really searching and grabbing for answers right now.
What I don't really quite understand, though, is the draw. Maybe you can explain it to me. The draw between...
The draw is anger.
Well, with evangelicals and Trump specifically, because there is really no indication there, really. I mean, I'm not a religious person, but if I was a Christian, I would look at him and say, okay, he tried to quote the Bible. He misquoted the Bible several times. He doesn't have any sort of indications that he's a Christian. How many times has he been married? How many times has he cheated on the wives before he married another one? I mean, there is no indication in his background that he actually lives Christian values. So what is the draw between him and the evangelicals? I just don't get it.
It's the draw for anybody else, and it's not a draw that I agree with. It's not a draw that I see, but it's just he says one thing that they kind of agree with, and it might not have to do with religion at all, but once he says that right thing, it seems to be he's got a supporter for life, and he can do anything and say anything, and they will stay with him. So I don't see, as you said, I don't see anything that really shows him as being a Christian. Not even, he doesn't even, I don't believe he's even pro-life or really pro-life, whether he says so or not. So I'm not seeing the Christian draw, but I think it is. He said something about the border and immigration, and then, he's got them when the other candidates haven't touched on that issue. So,
well, isn't the draw emblematic of the fact that conservative Christian women are a political force, and they think very differently from progressive Republican women or progressive Democratic women or progressive independent women?
Yeah, that's a voting bloc that I don't know a whole lot about. That's not, I'm not personally familiar with it. It's not part of the culture that I come from. I think what's interesting about Trump is that if you want to wonder why his sort of non-Christian principles are getting traction with Christian voters, his policy positions in many cases aren't that far off of many of the other candidates. They're all quite extreme. And so if you want to talk about support for the poor, support for refugees, everyone wants to build a wall. So if that's the standard by which we're judging whether he's Christian or not, other people are definitely not meeting that standard either.
So, Avis, the Supreme Court, any chance President Obama will pick an African-American woman this time, specifically Loretta Lynch, and could she, because she was recently confirmed last spring as Attorney General, could she get past the Senate again?
Sure. Well, we're definitely pushing for the president to appoint an African-American woman to the Supreme Court. It's definitely time. Lynch, I think, is the logical choice. She's already been vetted. She's already been approved. It's the most expedient choice, and it would be the most difficult choice for those who voted for her last time to now turn around and say no.
Really?
On the Indian American side, we are voting for Sri Srinivasan. I mean, how awesome is that for us, a tiny little population in this country, to see a guy like him get to where he is, coming from the D.C. circuit?
Yeah, but would he get through the Senate?
Probably not. No, of course not, because we see what Senator Orrin Hatch has already said. He said, "No, I'm not going to let these people through. I want to get through." So I think Senator Orrin Hatch might be a good candidate. We'll see.
Yeah, but he's 82 years old.
He'll live another 20 to do this thing. Okay, I love that guy.
79. Yeah. No, I think that I don't know if anybody's going to be able to get through this year. That it's become so toxic already. I think Obama will nominate somebody and the Senate will hold until the next president gets elected.
Well, Grassley, Senator, the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Senator Grassley, he said that he was open to holding hearings.
Well, that's his constitutional duty to do so,
yes,
because
that's
the
one
president
thing.
gets to nominate and the Congress or the Senate gets to advise and consent on the nomination. I do think one consideration for the administration regarding who they nominate is it has to be someone that in some ways they're willing to have rejected. And that person probably would not get a second chance under, President Hillary Clinton or President Bernie Sanders, if it were a Democrat, to be put forward again. And so they probably will not put forward someone who they're hoping would replace, say, Ruth Bader Ginsburg next term.
I would say, though, it would be a smart political move. Let me be very specific. It would be a smart political move for this administration to put forth a black woman, because if you look at just the voting power of that specific bloc, black women are the #1 voters to turn out at the polls. The
black women feel upset that he's successfully nominated a Latina and a white woman before them.
Well, we're definitely saying it's time. And we have expectations, right? And it would just be a good political move on his part, because if the Senate were stupid enough to say no to a black woman, guess who they just energized for the November elections? And that's the last thing they want.
That's smart, Avis, and I agree with you there. I tend to, but what Zoe was saying was a really good point there. You've got to put up somebody that you're willing to have rejected, and that's where Srinivasan comes in. He's going to have a big problem with the pro-environmentalists.
Well, why do you have to put someone up who you're comfortable with seeing rejected? You have to pick somebody who is so perfect for the job, has no track record on the left or the right, and preferably of color, preferably of a woman, so that they can say to Republicans, look, we had this great nominee, and they rejected her.
And you're standing in the way of progress. I think that's a very effective argument.
But do you think, it's funny, I look at most partisan debates, and I covered Congress for 6 years in the late 80s, and I covered the court for 9 years in the 90s. And this one, I really see, usually I'm saying this party's wrong or that party's wrong. And in this one, they're both wrong. I mean, the fact is, whoever's in control of the White House wants to nominate in a presidential election year, and whoever's in control of Congress wants to filibuster that if they're of different parties. filibustered a nominee.
Absolutely. So, everybody is a hypocrite right now. You had Chuck Schumer back in 2007 saying, wait till after the election, and now he's saying, no, don't use my words against me. Like, this is a different time.
Well, you're saying every Democrat. It's all Republicans,
too. I'm
too.
getting to that. It's Republicans, absolutely, or they wanted the nominee in 2007, and now they want to hold off.
Well,
everyone's a hypocrite.
I think what people are noticing, though, is that Mitch McConnell, from day one of this administration, said that his number one goal was to make sure that President Obama was a one-term president. We've seen a continuous agenda of obstruction for 8 years, and this is just the cherry on top. People are tired of it.
Well, that does make it a little different, you think?
I think it does make it different, for sure. But I think the biggest problem the Republicans have right now is that Democrats are pushing back on should this newly elected president that we'll have next year be able to appoint this person. And I think the simple answer is yes.
All right. Go ahead. Last word.
I was going to say that basically asserts that our president that we elected for a 4-year term should only serve 3 years of his term. So should he not do anything else for the next?
Right. That's the other thing. Is like, when's the cutoff? Like, okay, now you can nominate, but now you've got a year left. You've got 16 months left. Now you can.
If Reagan did it, Obama should be able to do it.
All right. Let us know what you think. Please follow me on Twitter at Bonnie Bay and @To the Contrary. From the Supreme Court to college football and sexual assault.
Is there a connection between college football, binge drinking, and rape? A new study called College Party Culture and Sexual Assault suggests there is. Researchers analyzed 21 years of data from campuses as well as police reports at 96 colleges with Division I football. They found, quote, significant and robust evidence that football game days increase reports of rape among 17 to 24-year-old women by 28%, end quote. For home games, it was a 41% increase. For away games, 15%. The paper suggests colleges consider these results when designing sexual assault prevention programs.
So, Ash, how is it that when they design sexual assault prevention programs, they're supposed to include this information? Why not just bar parties on Saturday night before games, or monitor, screen all the liquor or what the drinks that are given out at these parties?
Well, that's completely unrealistic. You're not going to be able to fix those things. But I want to actually talk about the study itself, because when we're talking about a 41% increase, that sounds like a really big number. But is that from 10 reports to 14, 25 reports to 35? No. It's less than one report to less than one report. It's not huge numbers of increases. It's just the scary number. And if you look at these reports, they're not saying what the actual number of reports are. They're just saying this big increase in order to scare people and make it seem like more of an epidemic than it actually is.
Really?
So you're saying if they're not saying the number, how can you say it's less than one?
Oh, because I actually talked to the study's author.
Oh, really? How do you go from less than one to less than one and be 40% jump?
Because
that's not mathematically possible.
Yeah, if it's a 0.05% to, I think, 0.06%, it's a 40% increase, but it's still not an actual, increase in the number of, because it's an average thing, right?
So the authors of the study did do some calculations, which admittedly are calculations, but based upon the numbers that we do have, they estimated it would be several hundred more rapes and sexual assaults a year. But quibbling with numbers aside, we can spend all day quibbling with sexual assault statistics, which lots of sexual assault skeptics like to do, but that avoids talking about the real issue, which is that it does happen, even if reporting is difficult to come by in terms of exact numbers. And the real question is how we're going to improve the support systems for victims. Or people who come forward.
But isn't the real question, how do we stop this?
Well,
we have to start looking at the alcohol situation.
But we have to look at the alcohol situation. We have to look about the way that this country talks about sex. We don't like to talk about sex. It's difficult. It's not just consent.
We don't like to talk seriously about it, but we are so much more a hyper-sexualized culture than when I was in college. It's amazing to me. This kind of stuff was not going on. Well, and young women were using drugs. They were using alcohol, but there wasn't this there didn't seem to be, and certainly the data weren't there, so we can't compare on a scientific basis.
Feels up.
But there weren't, frat parties were pretty much limited to the South. They weren't going on in the North or the West, and or at least to the extent they are today. And there wasn't as much drinking, and there wasn't as much spiking of drinks.
Well, I think you make some fair points about just the ante feeling upped every generation. And as somebody who was the head of a major Greek organizational system at a state school, I don't think the problems really truly lie within our fraternities and sororities. I think the problem lies in how we're rearing our children in today's society. We're not teaching young boys to respect women's bodies, to respect women, and to respect sex. And I think that's where the issue is. We need to teach our young men not to rape. We need to stop talking about women putting themselves out there in such a way that they are asking to be raped. But I think we really ought to shift that conversation to boys. And these boys growing into young men who are going to college and experiencing the freedoms, whether they're inside a frat house or outside of them, is kind of really doesn't matter.
I'm sorry, I don't think women are ever asking to be raped. I just like to put that.
That's what I'm saying. They're never asking for it.
Right.
Completely.
Right.
But I want
to clarify, you need to teach a boy not to rape. If you raise that child to respect women as much as the daughter respects men, why do you have to teach them not
because everything in
to
society
rape?
is hypersexualizing them. You're not a man if you're not going for that girl in a particular way. You're not a woman if you're not flaunting what you have in a particular way. And so I think the conversations about how women protect themselves and how men don't rape have just been so convoluted and so crazy that we're just grabbing for answers in things like statistics.
Yeah,
You
that's
have a son. Did you have to teach him not to rape a woman?
Well, no, not necessarily in that way, but I agree generally with what you're saying is you teach young men how to approach women with respect and teach them about what conversations around no. I think what I'm disturbed about, and I think this kind of touches on what you're saying here, is that we've seen so many examples, especially with video cameras and everyone with their cell phones, of young men taking advantage of young women who are not able to protect themselves and taping it like it's a joke. I mean, that is rape. And for some reason, a lot of times boys don't even see that as rape. So having those discussions with young men, I think, are important. And I've had those types of discussions with my sons around, you need to hear a definitive yes, not just the lack of no. That's a very important distinction. And I think
the conservative answer is always, oh, that girl shouldn't have been wearing that short dress. She's putting herself out there in a society where, wearing that short dress, she's open to it, right? No, the answer is telling your son, you don't use technology that way to violate a woman's right, and that's disrespectful. So that's my issue with where things have been in the past 10 to 20 years.
Where they are now is that the broadening of the definition of sexual assault includes pretty much anything. And so we're getting to this point now where a man can completely respect a woman and still get accused. There was a case at Georgia Tech just very recently where a woman was too drunk to get home on her own. So the young man, her roommate, she was locked out. She was waiting for her roommate to come get her. So the young man said, come stay on just sit on my couch and stay here where it's safe, where you're not going to be outside in the cold alone. And then he gets accused of being intimidating and, involuntarily imprisoning her. And he gets expelled from school. And the school told him that the best thing for him to do would have been to put her in a cab with a stranger to go sit on her step out in the door. So you have these cases where men are respecting women and still being accused because the culture has now become the point where everything can become a sexual assault accusation.
I want to hear your response to that.
I don't know the specifics of that case. I do think part of the issue is we have all these narratives about rape that are extremely unhelpful because they put forward the idea of rape as something that's extremely violent and that happens it's perpetrated by a stranger. And so I think what's becoming very difficult now is we have these cases where it's people that either well or through a social circle in a college setting, for example. And these scenarios where the definition of sexual assault or rape that we use in the popular narratives don't really match up with these real life scenarios. And so that's why it becomes so complicated. These are criminal justice issues, but the actual clear lines of the law don't always fit the real life situations.
Or maybe the laws aren't that clear.
Exactly.
Behind the headlines, female curves shape a large part of American culture. Humans are the only female animals with curves. We spoke with an anatomist who tells us the scientific and controversial implications of these singular features of women's bodies.
Why is it only humans where females are curvy? Why is it only our one species where females have so much more fat than men do to make them that distinctive shape? Because it doesn't happen in any other species.
David Bainbridge is an anatomist from Cambridge University. He has studied and written about what he calls curvology, the science of women's curves. Women's bodies, on average, are 27% fatty tissue, while men's are 14%. Most of that tissue is stored in the derriere and thighs, which give women a curvier shape than men on average.
In other animals, you often see a great difference in shape between males and females, but they're not usually to do with fat.
So why do women have curves, fat stored in certain parts of their bodies?
Our offspring grow these enormous brains, the distinctive feature of humans, and most of the weight of a brain, apart from water, is fat. And so we now think that lots of the extra curves are really they're a reserve of fats to make baby brains, because those reserves of fats tend to sit there for years and years, and stubbornly, many women would call them, and then suddenly they're mobilized when women give birth.
This theory is supported by other studies.
There does seem to be a correlation between the fat in those particular areas, the thighs and the buttocks, in a woman and the eventual IQ of her children. Now, of course, all of these things are averages. Everything in science is averages. So it just means that there's a correlation between the two.
Bainbridge hypothesizes men may be subconsciously attracted to curvy body shapes for that reason.
The men who prefer women with these curves, all you need is for their babies to be more successful. And then just by the relentless mathematics of evolution, it's their genes that get passed on.
Yet body fat can also lead women to develop self-esteem issues or even eating disorders. A recent Glamour magazine survey found 80% of women reported feeling badly just looking in the mirror. Despite our cultural obsession with curves, women are also pressured to be extremely thin. Bainbridge says the cult of thinness is mainly a product of modern society, while preference for curves might be more deeply ingrained.
It can be very difficult to separate the genetic part from the cultural part, also because, of course, those two interact with each other. If you're looking at male preferences in female body shape, you find that a preference for sort of broad hips and a narrow waist, that's pretty much consistent all around the world, which would tend to suggest that maybe that is an inbuilt genetic thing.
Some feminists have criticized the book for its scientific tone when discussing women's bodies.
Some people just feel uneasy about issues like female body shape being analysed in a sort of scientific, evolutionary, biological way. We're a society that's obsessed with women's body shape, and I think if you just look at the cultural, you're missing out on something that's really going to help us understand why we are the way we are.
So, Rina Shah, is it sexist to have done a book about women's body shapes?
Absolutely not. This is intriguing material. I think it's ridiculous that some of these feminists, and I'm a feminist, I have to say, it's ridiculous to call this out and say the tone is wrong. It's food for thought. Let's take it as that. What I find a huge problem with is Glamour magazine saying 80% of you have a problem when you look in the mirror. Well, guess what, Glamour? You're the reason for that. Honestly, as someone who grew up always curvy, always struggled with my curves, learned to embrace and love them in my late 20s, and now after having a child, having the new struggle, it's the societal expectations of having to be thin right away and being rail thin at that. And I think these magazines have pushed that forward.
One of the things I think people are objecting to about the book, which I will say up front that I haven't read, is that he states that women's appearance is their central concern. And I think that that's while it's certainly true that there are so many societal pressures, as you just articulated, that are making us think about our bodies a lot, I think that's an extremely reductive way to look at women's concerns. I think most women on the planet are thinking about how they're going to survive day to day, how they're going to feed their families, and if they're elite women, how they're going to pursue their professional dreams and get the education they want to get.
Yeah, but still, I mean, it's all around you. You can, yes, sure. You can, and I was that way in my 20s, certainly more academic than worrying about cultural stuff. But on the other hand, you see Kim Kardashian with, maybe it helps with this teeny waist and this obviously injected huge derriere. Does this help explain what's going on here?
I think part of it does. I think we're looking at where we are right now as a society, where we might be thinking about it in a biological way, whereas like, you know, the different proportions, how they can carry children. But you also look at different cultures and societies throughout history. Remember, we all know the story of back in Greek and Roman times where a plumper woman was more desired because it meant she had money. So I think there's a societal implication to women being thin, but that maybe under everything it really is biological. So I think I agree with you that this book is just one aspect of that, and feminists are free to do their own books, which they have, about the societal implications. And I think, you know, this is just another voice and another perspective, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Well,
Final thoughts?
Yeah, I just think culturally speaking, black women know about having curvier bottoms, and I don't think we'd have a problem with this book at all.
Well, does it surprise you that curvy women have more intelligent children on
Not
average?
in the least.
All right, you knew that was coming. That's it for this edition. Please follow me on Twitter and visit our website, pbs.org/to the contrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week. And I wanted to have time to ask